It started with a favor, just helping my best friend's mom fix a broken cabinet. But the way she looked at me that day, like she hadn't been seen in years, changed everything. One quiet moment, one mistake that didn't feel like one. And before I knew it, I was falling for the one person I shouldn't have. She said, "The bed feels empty." And that's when I realized, so did I. I never thought helping my best friend's mom fix a squeaky cabinet would stay in my head this long. But that afternoon, it wasn't about the cabinet. It was about her voice when she said my name. Her house always smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. Everything in it had a kind of order that felt lived in, not forced. When I stepped inside, she was already kneeling on the floor, hair tied up, sleeves rolled to her elbows. "Didn't think you'd actually come," she said without looking up. Her tone was casual, but something in it soft, almost teasing, made my stomach tighten. "I said I would," I replied, setting my tool bag down. "Wouldn't want you breaking your hand over a cabinet hinge." That made her smile, a small one. "You sound like your father." "I'll take that as a compliment." "Don't." He never finished anything he started. The silence after that landed heavier than I expected. She didn't look at me, and I didn't know what to say, so I focused on the screw in front of me. The air felt still, like the kind that holds back rain. When I finished tightening the hinge, she handed me a glass of water. Her hand brushed mine, just barely, but it was enough to throw my heartbeat off rhythm. Her nails were short, clean. She had a faint scar on her wrist, the kind you don't notice unless you're looking too long. "You work too hard," she said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "Your mother told me you've been doing extra shifts at the garage." "Yeah," I said, trying to save up. "For something special?" "I don't know. Maybe just to feel like I'm moving somewhere." She nodded slowly, eyes on the window instead of me. "That doesn't go away, you know? That need to keep moving, even when you don't know where." There was a quietness in her voice that didn't match the confidence she usually carried. For a second, I wanted to ask what she meant, but something told me she wouldn't answer. When I stood to leave, she followed me to the door. The evening light spilled across her living room, turning everything gold. She looked softer in that light, less like someone's mother, more like someone still figuring things out. "Thanks for helping," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's been lonely here lately." I hesitated. "You mean since?" She shook her head quickly. "No, just nights feel longer than they used to." That's when she said it, quietly, like a thought she didn't mean to share. "The bed feels empty." The words hung there, fragile and uninvited. She looked at me, eyes widening slightly, as if realizing too late what she'd said. I should have laughed it off, said something light, but I couldn't move. My throat went dry, and the room suddenly felt smaller, warmer. Then, softly, carefully, she stepped closer. Her lips brushed my cheek. It wasn't a kiss meant to be anything. Just a thank you, maybe, but my chest caught fire all the same. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Don't think too much about that. I'm just tired." I nodded, even though thinking was all I could do. When I finally walked back to my truck, the sky was turning violet. I sat there longer than I should have, hands still warm where hers had touched mine. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something that it had been a week since that moment in her living room, but it hadn't left me. Every night, I'd hear her voice again. "The bed feels empty." The way she said it, like she didn't mean to, but needed someone to hear it anyway. When she called again, this time asking if I could help move some boxes from her basement, I said yes before she finished the sentence. The day was overcast, the kind where even the light feels tired. She met me at the door with that same calm composure, but her eyes looked softer, rimmed with something I couldn't name. "Basement's a mess," she warned. "Haven't touched it since, well, a long time." Her voice trailed off. I didn't ask what she meant. The air downstairs smelled faintly of dust and old paper. She handed me a small flashlight, her fingers brushing mine again. A small, accidental touch that somehow didn't feel accidental anymore. "You don't have to do all this," I said, trying to sound casual. I know, she murmured. But sometimes cleaning helps. Even when there's nothing left to fix. I glanced at her then, hair loose this time, a faint line of exhaustion under her eyes. It struck me how different she looked when she wasn't trying to hold everything together. As we worked, the silence between us felt less like distance and more like understanding. She'd stop sometimes, hold an old photograph for a little too long, then quietly put it aside. At one point, she sat on the stairs, dust on her jeans, eyes far away. You ever feel like your life just changed without asking you first? She said. Yeah, I said quietly. All the time. She smiled at that, a tired, almost grateful kind of smile. You're too young to understand that kind of regret. Maybe, I said, but I understand wanting to go back, even when you know you can't. Something flickered in her expression. Not surprise, more like recognition. For a second, she looked at me in a way that felt heavier than words. Like she saw something in me she wasn't supposed to. I looked away first. When we finished, she offered me coffee upstairs. The kitchen light hummed softly. She leaned against the counter, both hands around her mug like she needed its warmth. You're quiet today, she said, trying not to say something stupid. Her brow arched slightly. Like what? Like how you look different today. Her lips parted, but no words came. Just a long, charged silence. She set her mug down slowly, fingers trembling just enough to notice. She began, but never finished. I nodded, pretending not to notice the crack in her voice. When I left, she followed me to the door again, just like last time. But this time she didn't touch me, didn't smile either. She just looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. It started raining that evening, the kind that comes out of nowhere, sudden and relentless. I just finished a late shift at the garage when I saw her name flash on my phone. Power's out again. I can't find the fuse box. Could you come by? I should have said I'd come in the morning. But 15 minutes later, I was at her doorstep, soaked through, heart already beating faster than it should. She opened the door wearing a sweater too big for her, sleeves pulled over her hands. Her hair was loose, damp from the humidity, and for a moment, I forgot why I was there. Sorry, she said, stepping aside. Didn't think it would pour like this. The house was dim, lit only by candles she'd set around the living room. The soft flicker made the space look warmer, more intimate, dangerous, even. The fuse box is in the hallway, she said, voice low. I tried, but I got nervous. I smiled faintly. You're not supposed to be near wires anyway. That's my job. When the lights finally flicked back on, she exhaled with relief. You really are good at this, she said softly. You fix things. Not everything, I muttered before I could stop myself. She looked at me then, really looked, the kind of gaze that strips away every defense. You're drenched, she said, almost whispering. Let me get you a towel. She disappeared into her room. When she came back, she handed me one and hesitated before speaking. Do you want to wait until the rain slows? It's coming down hard. So I stayed. We sat in the living room, the soft hum of rain filling the silence. She made tea and we talked about nothing, the weather, her garden, how the house still creaked when it rained. But every word sat on top of something heavier, something neither of us dared to name. At one point, lightning flashed outside, and the thunder came right after. She flinched, just slightly, and I noticed her hands tighten around the cup. Without thinking, I reached out, just to steady her fingers. She didn't pull away. For a few seconds, her hand stayed under mine. Warm. Still. Then she looked up, eyes full of something fragile and unsaid. Don't, she whispered. I wasn't. I know, but don't. The rain kept hitting the windows. I could have sworn she wanted to say more, but she stood and turned away, running a hand through her hair like she needed to shake off whatever just happened. The air between us felt charged. Not romantic, not even safe, just real. I stood up to leave, but she stopped me halfway to the door. You should go now, she said, voice trembling just enough to betray her. My hand was halfway to hers when she said it. And I did. But only my body left that room. I didn't see her for 3 days after that night. But she was everywhere. In the rain on the windows at work, in the silence when I tried to sleep, in the small ache I couldn't explain. When I finally went back to return the wrench I'd left behind, she opened the door before I even knocked. It was like she'd been waiting. You left this, I said, holding it up. Her eyes flicked to the wrench, then back to me. You didn't need to come all the way for that. I know. The words hung between us like a confession neither of us meant to make. She stepped aside and I followed her in. The house looked the same, but something felt different. Maybe it was us. We stood in the kitchen. Not too close, not far enough. She poured herself a cup of tea, hands steady this time. I watched the steam rise, curling in the air between us. Finally, she broke the silence. About that night, she began. I looked up, but she hesitated, staring at the floor. I shouldn't have asked you to come. You needed help. That's not what I mean. Her voice softened, the edges of it fraying. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I wanted to tell her she wasn't the only one, that I'd been replaying every look, every silence. But the words wouldn't come out right. Instead, I said, you don't have to explain. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile people use when they're trying not to cry. I do, she whispered, because I can't keep pretending this is normal. Her honesty hit harder than I expected. I took a step closer without thinking, close enough to smell the faint trace of her perfume, to hear her breathing catch. What are we doing? She asked quietly. It wasn't a question about the night or about us. It was bigger than that, a question people ask when they realize they've crossed a line they can't uncross. I don't know, I said, but I can't seem to stop. She looked at me for a long time, searching, weighing, remembering. Her eyes shimmered with something like fear, but also something that felt like surrender. Then she whispered, you remind me of the person I used to be, before I learned how to live without wanting anything. I didn't know how to answer that. I just stood there, trying to memorize her face, knowing this moment would probably hurt later. We didn't move. The air between us pulsed with everything neither of us said. Then, slowly, she stepped back. A single, quiet retreat, and the distance felt unbearable. She didn't say anything, I'd later tell myself. Just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. The next time I saw her, she was sitting on the front porch with an old photo album in her lap. The sun was setting, soft gold spilling over her hair. She didn't look up when I walked up the steps, just kept turning the pages slowly, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. I didn't think you'd come back, she said finally. I told you I would, I said, sitting on the step below hers. You left your porch light on. Her lips curved faintly. Old habit. I used to leave it on for someone who never came home. I didn't ask who, but she flipped a page and I saw a younger version of her, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize. Her fingers rested on the edge of the photograph. He was my husband. We were kids, really. Thought love meant always saying yes. Her voice didn't shake, but her hand did. What happened? I asked quietly. She looked at the horizon, eyes far away. He stopped seeing me. Not because he stopped loving me, but because I stopped trying to be seen. I didn't know what to say. The wind brushed past us, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and something fading. She turned another page, this time a picture of a boy about my age. That's my son. Your friend. The weight of it landed all at once. I'd forgotten, somehow, that she wasn't just a woman. She was his mother. The lines between right and wrong snapped back into focus. She must have seen the conflict in my face, because she said softly, "You don't have to feel guilty. You haven't done anything wrong." "Then why does it feel like I have?" I asked. Her gaze met mine, calm, but sad. "Because you're a good person, and good people still want things they shouldn't." We sat in silence after that. The world around us dimmed, the air cooler now. She closed the album, resting it beside her. "You remind me of him sometimes," she said suddenly. Not my husband, my son. When he was younger. Before life started teaching him how to build walls. That stung, but not in a bad way. It made something inside me ache. Not for what we had, but for what we couldn't have. I wanted to say something, to tell her I didn't see her as anyone's mother, or anyone's past. But before I could speak, she exhaled deeply, like she'd been holding her breath for years. She took a breath like she hadn't allowed herself to in years. I'd think later. And for the first time, she looked at me without fear. In that look, something changed. The tension didn't vanish, but it softened, like the moment before a storm breaks into light. And for the first time, it didn't feel forbidden. It just felt true. The next few days blurred together, half in thought, half in memory. I go to work, fix engines, talk to customers. But somewhere beneath it all, I was waiting. For her voice again. For something I couldn't name. It was late when she finally called. Her tone was calm. But there was something different. Something quiet. Like she'd already made a decision. Could you come by? Just for a minute. The house looked softer that night. Lamps instead of candles. The kind of calm that follows after a storm. She was sitting by the window, a blanket draped around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the street outside. I made tea, she said. You don't have to stay long. But I stayed anyway. We didn't talk for a while. The clock ticked. The wind moved the curtains. I could hear her breathing, steady, tired, human. Finally, she said, I thought if I ignored it, it would fade. I didn't ask what she meant. I knew. I've spent most of my life pretending I didn't need anyone, she continued. That being strong meant being alone. But you, she looked at me then. You made it harder to lie to myself. I didn't move, couldn't. The air between us was too fragile. You don't owe me anything, she said, voice low. You have a whole life ahead of you. I just needed you to know. She turned her gaze back to the window, and I could see her reflection in the glass. Her shoulders trembling, her jaw tight. I crossed the room slowly. Not to make a move, not to say anything, just to be closer. The floor creaked beneath me, and when I sat beside her, she didn't turn away. For a long time, we just sat there. Two people who'd spent too long hiding behind good intentions. Then, without words, she reached for my hand. It was such a small thing, that touch, no spark, no sudden rush of music in the background. Just skin against skin, warm and trembling, like honesty made visible. Her thumb brushed the back of my palm once. Then again. I didn't speak. Neither did she. But something inside me eased, the waiting, the guilt, the wanting. It all fell quiet. She leaned her head against my shoulder, eyes closed. And for the first time, it didn't feel wrong. It didn't even feel like a secret. It felt like two people finally telling the truth without saying a word. When I looked down, she was smiling, faintly, tiredly. She didn't say she loved me, I thought, but she let her guard down. And that was louder than any I love you ever could be. Outside, the night was still. And for once, neither of us filled it with words. That it's strange how silence changes once you stop fighting it. Before, it felt heavy, full of what-ifs and shouldn'ts. Now it feels like peace. I still see her sometimes. Not as often. Not like before. But enough to know she's okay. The house looks different these days, brighter. The porch light that used to burn alone at night now glows softer, steadier. I help her fix things once in a while. A shelf, a leaky tap, the little things life keeps breaking. But we don't talk about that night. We don't have to, because something shifted between us. Not lost, not broken, just understood. She still has that quiet grace about her, that calm strength that hides 1,000 stories. But now she laughs more easily. Sometimes when she catches herself smiling, she looks away, maybe remembering the same things I do. The world didn't fall apart after what happened. We didn't cross some line we couldn't return from. We just learned something about being human, how wanting doesn't always mean taking, and how love doesn't always need a name to be real. There are moments that stay with me, like when she asked, "Do you ever regret it?" And I said, "No. I just wish I'd known what to do with it." She smiled then, that same half-smile I'll probably never forget. It's enough that you felt it, she said. Most people go their whole lives without ever feeling something that real. After that, we didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The kind of connection we had doesn't fade, it just changes shape, softens at the edges. Becomes something quiet, like memory. I've met other people since. But sometimes, when I walk home at night, I'll hear her voice in my head. Steady, honest, unguarded. Not the words themselves, but the weight of them. The way she made silence feel like an answer instead of a question. And maybe that's what it was all about. Not the kiss, not the touch, not the wanting, but the understanding. The rare kind that doesn't ask for forever, only for honesty in the moment. I didn't just fall for an older woman. I fell into something rare, something true, something that reminded me how fragile it is to feel it all. And I hope, if you're listening, you find something like that too. Because love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes, it just sits quietly beside you in the dark, waiting to be noticed. If the story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?